send me this stuff.
Yeah.
I had one the other day. A very smart lady sent me here it is. It's a link with Talib. What's it? Rashida Talib?
Yeah.
Yeah. And here she is talking to Congress about how we need to convert the United States to Islam. There were only two problems with it. It wasn't her, and she wasn't addressing Congress. This was some lady who, I guess she looked like her because she had on a hijab, okay? But it was in 1989, which would have put Ms. Talib, I think, maybe 9-10 years old. And she was addressing a group of radical Muslims, okay? So here's all these people shaking their head agreeing with her. This wasn't Congress. This wasn't Talib. This was some other lady doing something. And I respectfully
I've seen that one, yeah.
I respectfully reached out to the lady. I said, look, this isn't what you say. It's not her. And it was 1989. Look at the video. She said, well, that's not on my video. I said, yeah, it's a timestamp in the corner. You sent it to me. I didn't. But please look at this.
Right.
You got to look at the truth.
Yeah.
You got to look at the truth. I think a lot of people try to put a blurring filter on the truth.
Yeah.
Like this whole vampire thing, okay?
Right.
Well, vampires are silly. They're ridiculous. But this plus this plus this plus this certainly doesn't equal that.
Right.
And if it doesn't equal that, why doesn't it equal that?
Right.
Well, there could be another integer to this equation that we haven't figured in.
Right. And so I even get into the biology and the science. I spent, like, during the shutdown, I felt kind of weird, but I spent some time researching the concept of the biology of what a vampire is. Because in most of the books, it's, quote, magic.
You know, and most people will... They'll binge watch a television show, or they will post pictures of their cats. You research the biology of vampires.
Yes. And I loved it. It was like, wow, it's interesting. And there's a couple, most of it's joke stuff, but there's some things that were like, you know, like the history of what.
That's how all that stuff is. It's joke. Wait a minute.
Right. And because and basically what happens with the Robert character is that there was some hardcore racial stuff going on in Chicago. The hardcore crime was off the charts there. And again,
not like today.
See, and that's what really scares me. So basically what happens is as crime gets out of control, and I did have this in there way before this happened now. You know, the local authorities were like, we can't handle this. We need federal help. So, and this actually did happen. So there's a federal task force, but the federal task force is actually on the take from the vampire elders. And they use that as a cover, and they put guys in helmets so you can't see their face.
Yeah.
And they use them to take out people they don't like.
So in the novel, in the book, I'm not going to call it a novel.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it a book.
Right.
Chicago has a big-time problem. They talk about bringing the feds in. Chicago government doesn't want them to. Then something unforeseen happens where they say, okay, we'll let them in.
So in this one, though,
because that happened this week in Chicago, with the mayor of Chicago.
Well, that was what really freaked me out. So in the book, it's a lot more. I actually go from what the superintendent was saying, because I remember I was going to school in Peoria, and I remember him talking about a task force. And back then, what people don't realize, there was a lot of people who thought George Bush was a stooge for the NWO. Mm-hmm. So when people talk about the New World Order, that's not new.
No,
Ministry has a song called "The New World Order," saying George Bush is using the Iraq War and crime to take over.
They said the same about his father, because his father was a trilateralist.
Right. Well, this is I'm talking about his father there, because his father was president back then.
Right.
So, so what they do is they give Robert, actually, something happens to where they decide to give Robert a lot of territory, which is unheard of for a vampire his age, and that creates he's very new, but something happens to where there's such a gap between what they need to know and what they do know, the elders, that they needed a group of vampires to take care of certain things, like financially, legally, whatever. And the person that they had taken care of, they have to get rid of him. And so Robert just ends up, he's a placeholder. They have no intention of letting him keep all this.
Right.
And they think that he doesn't get this. And he's like, wait a minute. Why is it that in our clan, every other clan has 200- and 300-year vampires, but in our clan, the oldest vampires are like 60. He figured, and no one ever asked questions because young vampires are terrified of the elders. Mm-hmm. But he starts learning, wait a minute. It's not really that you guys are that tough. It's that everybody's afraid of you because there are rules. And
pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
And the thing about it is, it's illegal, and pretty much every vampire law, it is illegal to write anything. They have a lot of laws, but you can't write any of them down. Mm-hmm. So you have all these laws, but you can't write vampire laws. So he's just like, well, if you can't write the law, is it really a law? Like, shut up, man. You're just a young vampire. You're going to get killed. But for various reasons, he's advancing, he and this other group. Now, the group that he's created with, they are the epitome. They are the epitome of the cancel culture. And which is funny because, again, this is before that got really big. But they have that mentality. Oh, you're a rich white guy. Everything you do is crap. And there were people like that in 1991. The difference was our politics were not polarized the way they are now. So you had people like that. I knew people like that, where anytime you were black and you had a friend who had a white friend that had any confidence, or there was a white woman who's attractive, there'd be these white people that would come up to you and go, well, they really don't like you. You can't trust them. But you can trust us. Because we're weak.
Were they just pissing in the well?
It's basically what you have now, but 30 years ago, they could not, their agenda could not succeed without, they couldn't beat the white conservatives or whatever they consider the white capitalists or the jocks or the stockbrokers or whatever. They couldn't win that fight anywhere.
So they picked a new one.
Well, the only way they could win the fight, they thought, is if they turned that group of people into being reflexively racist. And therefore you had black people saying, hey, you white Republican, you white male, strong white male, you're a bad guy.
So changing the perception.
Right, but this was the evolution of the 1960s, Columbia white civil rights era, where they're like, we're socialists, we're against capitalism, and we're going to save black people from racial oppression by attacking the man, the establishment, attacking the jocks. And so the game back then, and it's a little different now because there's so many different categories, but back then it was more simple. It's like, if you had a white friend who was, a jock, what you would say, or a white guy who's in a fraternity or whatever, and he was your friend, and you're black, and you're friends.
Sure.
You trust each other. You would have black people, and you would have white liberals, progressives, who would say, well, when you walk away, those people are calling you the N-word, and you can only trust us. And they breathe that death into almost, whether it's Obama, me, whoever, it's not just me. They breathe that death into millions of young black people's ears at that time.
And you're saying that based on experience because it happened to you.
Yeah, exactly. Like every day. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And you never know what someone says about you when you're not around. So it's a psychological game.
Even if it was 100% false, they put that little bit of doubt.
Right. And it creates, you can't disprove a negative. You
Correct.
Can't, they're not doing that. How do you prove they're not doing that? Well, you can't prove they're not doing it because they're not doing it.
Yeah.
And even if they are doing it, what is it that they're doing? And part of the book is a response to my response to that, which was, I don't care because I'm okay. And they took that as such an insult.
How could you not care?
It's like, what are you saying? Are you better than me? I say, I'm not making that choice. I'm saying if there's something wrong with me, I need to fix it. And if they're saying something about me that's not true and they're scared to tell me, then that's my advantage over them. And that was anathema to the black orthodoxy of the time. I'm not saying all black people. I'm saying the black intellectual orthodoxy was so connected to the white progressive ideal of the time. So many of these black people that I knew, these black intellectuals I knew, were like, oh, white people this, and anytime you question the mistreatment of white people, they go, well, what about what happened to black people? But almost everyone, like at the time back then, I noticed every one of them worked for some white woman at a college. They worked for a white woman at a college that was backed by some white corporate board. And I'm saying, you're going off on people for working for the man, and you work for a university? Well, yeah, education. Go, no. Universities are worse than oil companies. Yeah. They're worse than the stockbrokers.
Because they get paid the big money and don't have to show results.
And who do you think's doing all the research for the federal government?
Mm-hmm.
You're like, I'm against the man, and I work for I work for the University of Minnesota. I said, you're a corporate person. I remember explaining this to this black intellectual who was telling me you can't trust any white people that you're friends with. And I'm saying, how is that like assertive, productive blackness? How does your blackness hinge on distrusting someone because of the color of their skin based off of no evidence?
So Robert Faulkner, the placeholder,
yes,
is kind of like the token. He's the token young guy, which can be perceived as the token black in this area, who's the placeholder until something better comes along or until he changes it to
right. So within the Venturi community, the Venturi hierarchy is pretty, and again, it gets into what does it mean to be anti-black or racist? Like why do they favor the human whites? It's called the human domain, where they have to have a certain distance. They can't just go and make people do what they want to do all the time, because it creates it'll create a cascade of events that'll mess everything up. So they have to have a certain process in which they steer things in their direction, and there are rules for that.
And these are all the old ones who do this.
Yes.
And of course, that's not the way things are today at all. So because who's the Speaker of the House?
Nancy Pelosi.
And how old is she?
80.
Okay. Who is the head of the Senate?
That'd be Mitch McConnell.
And how old is he?
80.
Who's the President of the United States?
Donald Trump.
Okay, but he may not win re-election. How old is Joe Biden?
79.
Okay, there you go.
Wow.
See, this is all
Wait
fiction.
a minute. Oh, okay. Right.
And certainly none of those four look like the undead. I will say Trump probably doesn't. I've never seen an orange vampire. But
Trump is the least vampiric looking of the three.
That's correct. He doesn't. He couldn't do the Bela Lugosi widow's peak with his hair. I guess he could. He could do other things with it.
For the most part, vampires don't tend to be that big. I mean, he's bigger. Like they tend to be more like Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi. They tend to be or Joe Biden. They tend to be thin,
slight.
Not always, but because once like if you get turned as a 250-pound human, you stay that way forever. I mean, you stay in whatever state you're in, But so the other people that were created with him, they're a little bit younger, and they've embraced that 1990s liberal anti. They're those white progressive. You must be a racist because you're a Republican, and that plays into a scheme that the vampires have to have, the Venturi have to get rid of. There's two different sides, but they're within the nation. So you have the sect out there looping. They're like the boogeyman. They're basically like Hannibal. They're basically like the Carthaginians were for the Romans. He's out there somewhere. We're gonna have to fight him eventually.
Exactly.
But within the society, there's also a conflict between the vampire establishment and then the ones who are more primal. I mean, they're still part of the society, but they're more into their traditional values, and they're not as plugged into the power base, but they have their roles.
Sure.
And then there's different